I think we need to understand on the strategic level that President Trump faces very difficult choices. On the one hand, if he goes ahead and launches his attack, there is no guarantee that it will have any more effect than the last round of attacks had. Frankly speaking, if he goes ahead with his attacks, he knows that he's probably going to plunge the world into what will end up being a depression economically, not to mention the problems with famine that are going to arise. Because the fertilizer is absent, that so many countries, particularly in the global south, but also we're beginning to see shortages show up here in the United States as well. So the point is, if he decides to press ahead, he's going to harm a substantial portion of people in the world that are not our enemies. If anything, many of them are our friends. And he's aware of that, I think. On the other hand, if he withdraws, says, that's it, I can't do anything else, and this has been a failure, he faces national and international humiliation. People are going to begin to ask, well, why didn't you think about all these things to begin with? And of course, we know they didn't. So I think right now he's decided not to decide. And in addition to not deciding per se, he's spinning out a great deal of fiction. What we've learned over the last few weeks is that about 90% of whatever he says about the Iranians is just fiction, untrue. He has no ongoing talks with them. They've made it very clear they don't plan to talk to us at all. He continues to insist, well, the Pakistani field marshal asked me to do this. We don't really have any evidence for that. The only thing we can say is that the Chinese obviously have pressed the Pakistanis to hold this discussion with us. And obviously, the Chinese want an end to this disaster as much as everybody else does. But otherwise, the Chinese are not, though, going to pressure the Iranians to simply quit. They recognize this is a matter of sovereignty, independence, and survival for Iran. So I think it's a really bad situation. And the problem at this stage is the blockade, because the Iranians have said, as long as you're blockading us, we're not going to talk to you. A blockade is under international law an act of war. You want a ceasefire? Have a ceasefire, but call off the blockade. Now we're beginning to get reports that ships have slipped through the blockade. And that's not especially surprising. We have too few ships to blockade Iran. Now, what do I mean by that? During the Cuban Missile Crisis back in 1962, 63, we had 180 ships in the Caribbean and the North Atlantic. With those kinds of ships, it included a total of 8 aircraft carriers, multiple submarines, cruisers, destroyers, and we were operating on our home waters, which meant that it was very easy for us to sustain ourselves. We tightened a very effective blockade around Cuba. We called it a quarantine because we did not want to be accused of declaring war. We can't really do that very effectively now. The other problem is that everyone in the United States Navy at sea is being driven at least 500 to 600 miles south, away from the entrance to the Persian Gulf, because if they sail into that area, they risk being struck by tactical theater ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, unmanned systems. And at the same time, we keep insisting that Iran's military power has been broken or reduced by 50%. Just listen to all the various statements. I can't prove or disprove any of it. The only thing I can say is they seem to have probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20,000 missiles in their arsenal that they can continue to fire, and at least 40 to 50,000 unmanned systems or drones. So Iran is holding together. We keep insisting, well, there's no one over there to talk to because they can't make up their minds. We don't know who's in charge. As far as I can tell, that's complete fiction. They are very much in charge. They know what they're doing. They're no longer advertising the various commanders of key components, and for good reasons. We and the Israelis will assassinate them. So this thing is a disaster for President Trump.
Yeah.
If he attacks, he destroys the world economy, the global economy, harms tens of millions, probably almost a billion people around the world, and it's going to fail. There's no evidence that another attack of the same kind will make any difference. And then if he doesn't do anything, eventually he gives up and goes home, he fails. Either way, I think his presidency is at risk of being destroyed.
So, to conclude from your opening statement, is that essentially America has an enemy over here who refuses to give up, is standing firm over here. So that brings me to the to talks. Then that's the only way of de-escalation right now. Do you see any future for these talks? And before you jump in, I also want you to comment on the source of the reporting. Also, I have noticed this trend every 3 4 days. We're seeing at the start of opening bell in America when the markets open, a source-based input comes in that talks are about to be held. They're going to be held in 2 days. JD Vance is about to head to Pakistan. Explain what's a credible source. Is Do you think talks will happen? Right now, the New York Post is reporting that talks can happen as soon as Friday over here. So tell me, Colonel McGregor, what do you think?
I don't see any evidence right now that as long as we are blockading the Strait of Hormuz, that talks will be held. I simply don't. Whatever the Iranians have spoken and said they will or will not do something, it happens. That's not true for us. So the first point is, how do you hold talks if the blockade is the permanent sticking point? Secondly, yes, President Trump has made lots of statements, uttered all sorts of positive, optimistic outcomes, only to discover later on that this was erroneous, it was untrue. The financial markets in New York City continue to believe whatever Trump says. Now, my impression is that that's not going to last much longer. I think even in New York City on Wall Street, they're beginning to understand that they haven't been told the truth. But you also have evidence for something else that's extremely damaging and disturbing: corruption at the highest levels of the administration. People making enormous quantities of money by short selling stock or buying things within minutes of another statement by President Trump. Now, if this were just a few $1 million here or there, very few people would notice. But we're talking hundreds of millions, close to $1 billion. Now, this is not new in Washington. Everybody on the Hill takes insider information and tries to enrich themselves. It's a terrible problem. But we're seeing a lot of evidence that this is emanating from the White House, that the calls are going out from the White House. Now, I don't know if these are President Trump's family members, if they're his business partners, but the White House is dominated right now by financial magnates. In other words, billionaires who made their money through financial transactions. These are not production capitalists. These are not people who built industry, who created massive jobs. These are people who simply made money by moving money around. So that's very frightening.
Right.
So I think this crisis is being exploited for all sorts of things that are not right. And then finally, you have a lot of people that still believe that President Trump is doing something important for the United States. They want to see Iran as this top predator in the world, as the leading terrorist and so forth. And as I've said before, if you really want to look for Islamist terrorism, you go look for it in Pakistan, go look for it in Syria, go look for it in Afghanistan. But Iran, that's ridiculous. It's not been true for many, many years.
Colonel, tell me about from the Iranian point of view now. Do you see any uniformity in decision making over there? Because we do see various voices coming out, and we saw how Abbas Araghchi as well had made a comment, and then his comment was criticized by other factions within Iran. Do you see uniformity over there? And this that it is a difficult task to negotiate with the other party, which has such different voices coming out of it.
Well, the interesting part is there's more deliberation, more discussion, and more debate about what Iran should do along each step down this road to war than there is in the United States. A friend of mine said, "Who is debating anything in the House or the Senate?" Answer: almost nobody. Where's the evidence for anybody really scrutinizing the president and his administration and asking any really hard questions? There isn't. The press has been surprisingly quiescent. And when the press says something that President Trump doesn't like, he snaps at them, and the press seems to quiet down, get in line, and wait for another opportunity. Whereas in Iran, we know there are factions within the government, within the society, that hold different opinions about what should happen next.
Mm.
And as I've said to several people, if we had never attacked this country and let it alone, I think within 6 months to a year, we would have seen a new kind of government emerge in Iran because the determination to make the government more secular and less theocratic, to make it more responsive to the needs of the population, was very strong. But we attacked. A friend of mine who's much more familiar with the area and with Tehran than I am took out a map and drew lines around neighborhoods in Iran. He said, "Do you know what these are?" I said, "Well, it's Tehran." He said, "No, no, no. These are the neighborhoods where the upper middle class and middle class lives in Tehran. The people that live in these neighborhoods are the ones who are the most strident advocates for change in the theocracy, to move Iran down a different road." I said, "Oh, well, that's great." He said, "Well, they're all dead."
Ah,
I said, "What do you mean they're dead?" He said, "You bombed them." I said, "I bombed them?" He said, "No, the U.S. air and naval forces have bombed them and killed most of them." So one thing I think we can say at this point in time, whatever factions are out there, it's a debate largely about tactics. What
hmm.
should we or should we not do in this day and this week? I don't think strategically there's too much debate anymore because we have strengthened the hand of everyone who took the position we can never work with these people. We'll never be able to trust them. They'll never follow through on any promises they make. We have to stand fast and fight to the bitter end. I think that faction is in charge.
Now I want to talk about the neutrality of the mediator over here, which is Pakistan over here. Do you feel that they are a neutral player over here and can bring both sides to the table and bridge the gap that seems to be growing every day?
I think the Pakistani leadership is under enormous pressure from China, from Beijing, to do everything they can to make these talks work. So, as far as that is concerned, I think it's quite serious and quite real because China wants to end this. China does not profit from this. Now, the Chinese have stockpiled enormous quantities of oil. Some people say, well, they have 2 months left. Others tell me 3 or 4 months. The point is that China has been very prudent over the last 30 years and systematically built up its supply chains and its supplies to deal with these kinds of crises. Remember, the whole Belt and Road concept is designed to avoid confrontation with the United States Navy, which
Right.
talks all the time about blockading China and threatening Chinese ports. So China is in a much better position, I think, than almost anybody in Asia right now to deal with this. But having said that, the Chinese aren't doing business. If you're not doing business, you're not making money. They want an end to the war, and they are pressuring the Pakistanis to provide the platform that will be conducive to a negotiated outcome. But the Pakistanis can't perform miracles. They can't make the leadership in Tehran show up. Now, keep in mind when the Iranians did show up, there was a group of 70 people. They walked in with basically suitcases of materials, maps, data. They were prepared for serious negotiations because I think the Iranians would like an end to the war too. And
Mhm.
what did they find? Three people: the vice president, and then the two real estate gurus that are friends of Donald Trump, who are widely considered Israeli assets, Kushner and Witkoff. There was nobody there prepared to do anything. The whole thing was a sham. And under those circumstances, if you're sitting in Tehran right now, you say, "Well, this is a waste of time. These people aren't serious."
Hmm.
I mean, that's an indictment. Now we should have taken this seriously in Anchorage. The same thing happened in Anchorage. The Russians came in prepared to discuss everything in detail, once again, armed with data, plans, maps, and so forth. What did we come with?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. An F-35 flyby.
Yes, you got it. So, we're being treated to a lot of bluster and bombast from Donald Trump every day. Tweets that confuse, obfuscate, mislead. None of it is necessarily true. And no one can sort through what is or is not true. And the president seems to have terrified his entire cabinet. Everyone lives in fear of him. He loses his temper, throws things, behaves badly, as the British like to say, throws his teddy. So everyone is upset. Nobody knows what to do, and they do whatever Donald Trump says. I mean,
Hmm.
this is a hell of a government right now.
I'm going to try and counter you. It's not a counter. It's just another event that happened with the China question. So President Trump has also talked about this, and there's been reporting in the American media about this as well. That when the U.S. Navy interdicted the Tushka, one of the Iranian ships, they did find materials that had come from China, which they claim were dual-use technologies. I'm guessing maybe sodium perculate or something to help with their Iranian missile defense. It's a missile defense or ballistic capabilities. So, in that situation, do you really think China is this benign actor over there that they just want an end to this, or do they want this to keep America busy in the Persian Gulf through
Well,
Iran?
I think they've already gotten that wish fulfilled. We have expended hundreds of billions of dollars in terms of munitions and fuel. We've kept ships tied up and people in uniform tied up for months and months at a time. So if that was a goal, they've already achieved that. Right now, I think the Chinese and the Russians, by the way, will both do whatever they can to ensure that Iran survives.
Yeah.
Why? We've talked about this. Iran is another core civilizational state. It's a major continental power. It's a real nation, a real country with real people who have a real identity, culture, and language. Americans don't understand this because we have been dealing with very weak opponents. Remember that virtually everything in the Middle East is artificial in terms of its structure and roots. There were always two, at least in the last 500, 800 years, there were always two major powers in the region. One, the Turks or Ottoman Turkey, and the other, Persia. They're real. All the other states are, I don't want to go so far as to say oil wells with flags, but pretty damn close. And we found it very easy to dominate them and defeat them. That was not a major issue. This was the problem during the British Empire. It's why Britain walked into World War I, lost almost 1 million men, destroyed its national power ultimately, set the stage for total annihilation after World War II. They had been fighting weak opponents and weak adversaries. They thought they could dominate the Germans. It didn't work. It was a complete and utter failure. We thought, I think, that, oh, well, these Iranians, what's the difference between them and anybody else? We've done this in the Middle East before. We can get away with it. I hate to be blunt, but I think there was a lot of arrogance and ignorance at work.
Mm.
And it's failed. It's failed miserably. But again, can President Trump admit such a thing? I don't think he can. His personality militates against it. That's not the way he operates. He's got to twist whatever happens into evidence for his victory. That's going to be awfully difficult with Iran right now because the Iranians hold the strategic initiative.
Mm.
It's up to us to take the initiative back. The problem is we're not properly equipped. We're not strong in the areas we need to be to do that. That doesn't mean we're weak and stupid. It simply means we're the wrong force for the wrong mission in the wrong place.
What's the way out over here? So you can't essentially just exit completely without ruining your honor without President Trump getting rid of those that highly enriched uranium or some cap on the ballistic missile program of Iran. How does he go into the midterm elections? How does he spin this as a win for his public?
Well, I think we're going to end up doing what we did at the end of the Vietnam War. We
Yes,
left. We left. Now, we may insist that we reach some sort of agreement to sort of disguise the defeat. And we were defeated in Vietnam.
of course. Yeah.
And the Vietnamese were far weaker than the Iranians, in large part because we defeated ourselves. We have a habit of doing that. So I think in the final analysis, Trump will try to come up with something that disguises the strategic loss, the strategic defeat. But it's going to be tough. I don't know how they'll do it. And I don't see a whole lot of evidence that the Iranians are going to give them any help. See, the Vietnamese helped us escape. They created the illusion that there was some sort of meaningful agreement that would guarantee the survival of the Republic of South Vietnam. I don't see any evidence that the Iranians are going to do that for us. And why would the rest of the world? Why would anybody in the Middle East? Because all of this goes back again to Israel. And why would you want to do that? I don't see anybody in the Middle East or anywhere else in the world willing to sort of give us a pass, make us feel good.
If you're sitting in Riyadh, this doesn't sound too good. If America
Well,
just backs up and goes,
of course. And if you've learned anything, if you're in the GCC or any of the Emirates or states in the Gulf, you've learned that we cannot protect you. And of course, the Europeans need to understand that the same, what's the right word, the same gaps in capability that made it impossible for us to stop the massive missile assaults and unmanned system attacks exist in Europe. And they'd better wake up. They're going to have to defend themselves. They're going to have to deal directly with the Russians. In other words, they're not going to be able to turn to us either. In other words, what's happening today with Iran is going to have a cascading effect all over the world.
Mm,
If you're Korean or Japanese, what do you need us for?
mm,
We demonstrated the capability of defending you. I
yes.
think the answer is no. The world has changed. Technology has changed. So, what are you doing in Korea and what are you doing in Japan? What are you doing in the Gulf? What are you doing in any number of different places? Most of all, what are you doing in Germany? What are you doing in Poland? So I think all of this is going to change where we are in the world, where we fit in the world. The question is, can we adapt to reality? Can we become what I would call a normal nation? Except the fact that we are one of several great powers. We are not the supranational force that we want to be. We cannot impose our will. To the extent that we've tried with Iran, it's demonstrated that we can't do it.
Yeah. There was a viral news story, Colonel, and there isn't a lot of credible reporting, but it's the account of only one expert, an ex-CIA analyst, Larry Johnson, who claimed that President Trump reached for the nuclear codes, and it was General Dan Kane who basically stopped him. How much credit do you give this, or are you skeptical as well?
I'm skeptical because General Kane allegedly also talked about our capability to interdict Iranian shipping through the Strait of Malacca.
Yeah.
Well, what kind of insanity is that? So if he's capable of making such a statement, the other piece of this puzzle doesn't fit. Why would you fail in one war and then widen it into another to conceal your first failure? Now, I just don't know what to believe that comes through these newspapers. And
Yeah.
an awful lot of disinformation is planted from the CIA and other sources in the government. I think we need to be circumspect, let's put it that way, as well as skeptical.
I want to end this on a somewhat positive or maybe some possibility. Is it possible that a deal could somewhere involve, because it's happened with the JCPOA, where Iran decides to dilute its nuclear technology, put a cap on its ballistic missile technology in exchange for sanctions relief? Do you think that could possibly be a way out, and the regime survives in whatever fashion it is right now?
Well, I think the key to the JCPOA was that not only did we lift sanctions, but we made it clear that we were not going to wage war to change the regime. That's very important. So you're right, absolutely on target there. The Iranian people have to be left to determine their own future. But remember that we have a third party involved in this, Israel. Israel was very angry with Obama because of the JCPOA. It is Israel that's driving the war of annihilation against Iran. This is not, look, I discussed this briefly in 2020 with President Trump, and he struck me as being very interested in an agreement that would end the hostilities and open up Iran. I never heard him express any enthusiasm whatsoever for attacking Iran. But we also know that in the intervening period, the billionaires that supported him are strong advocates for the Israel lobby. We know that Mr. Netanyahu came to see him 7 or 8 times in the space of less than 12 months, always pushing him, pushing him, pushing him to do this. So if it were just us and if it were just President Trump, I think you could end this. I think he would say, all right, look, this is what I'm going to do. I'll lift the sanctions. I'm going to pull off the blockade. Let's talk. And I think you could get some sort of workable outcome. But it's not just us. It's Israel. And it's Netanyahu and his agents in the United States. They want total domination. And I
Colonel,
think we know that's not going to happen.